I once knew a man named Elias. He walked slower every day, not because he was giving up, but because he had something to teach. At 84, every step he took was deliberate, measured, powerful. At first, I thought his strength was fading. But then I learned true strength doesn't always speed up. Sometimes it slows down so others can catch what really matters. That experience changed how I see aging. And it led me here to 7 subtle signs doctors and researchers use to predict not just how long you'll live after 70, but how well. These aren't just numbers. They're stories your body is already telling you. In your walk, your grip, your balance, your sleep, your appetite, your stress, and your relationships. Stay with me, because what we'll uncover might just help you, or someone you love, walk a little slower and live a lot longer. I first noticed him on a Tuesday morning, one of those slow, quiet starts where even the fluorescent lights seemed reluctant to flicker fully on. He wasn't on my list that day, just a passing figure in the hallway outside room 113. I'd paused at the nurse's station, flipping through charts when I caught sight of him. He moved like the hospital floor was sacred, not weakly, not with the fragility of someone falling apart, but with intention, as if each step had meaning. His name, I would later learn, was Elias Ward, 84, widower, former shop class teacher. His records were unremarkable for his age: a pacemaker, stage 2 kidney disease, well-controlled hypertension. No recent surgeries, no active complaints, but the way he walked, that lingered in my mind longer than any lab result. That morning, I passed him without a word. He passed me without acknowledgement, just a shared silence. And yet, I couldn't stop watching his pace. The way he paused at the window near the elevator, the way he rested his hand gently on the sill as if to remind himself that he was still here. By the time I finished rounds, I had already asked a nurse, "Who's the man who walks like time doesn't own him?" She smiled. "Elias. Comes in twice a week. Doesn't always say why. Just likes to walk the halls." "Does he live nearby?" I asked. "No, he takes the bus." It made no sense. And yet, it made perfect sense. Our first real conversation happened by accident. Or maybe it didn't. I was walking toward the break room. He was sitting on the bench beside the vending machine, peeling an orange. "You in a rush?" he asked. I stopped, blinked. "Not particularly." "Then sit." There was no request in his voice, no invitation, just quiet authority. So I sat. We didn't talk at first. He continued peeling. I sipped cold coffee. 5 minutes passed, maybe more. Then he looked at me, not with curiosity, but with recognition, as if he knew something about me I hadn't admitted yet. "You ever wonder what strength looks like when it slows down?" I thought of marathons, of military medals, of heart surgeries. Then I thought of my father, post-stroke, gripping the side of a chair just to lift himself. I thought of the silence in my own house since Ava left for college. "No," I said. Elias smiled. "Then maybe you're ready." He didn't explain. And I didn't ask, because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Some patients come in to be healed. Others come in to heal something else. And Elias, he was about to teach me what it meant to carry a life quietly, to age not by years, but by wisdom, to walk slower, so others might learn to see. That day, I didn't document anything, but in my personal notebook, the one I kept tucked behind my badge, I wrote a single line: "Not every symptom needs a diagnosis. Some just need to be witnessed." I didn't know then how much I'd need that line, how much I'd need him. But I would, and soon. It wasn't long before his bench became part of my routine. Between appointments, I'd find myself glancing down the east wing just to see if he was there. Most days he was. Seated in the exact same spot, back straight, legs crossed at the ankle, eyes scanning the floor tiles as if reading something no one else could see. Some days he spoke first, some days he didn't speak at all, but the silence never felt empty. It felt earned. "Do you know why I sit here?" he asked me once, his voice barely above a murmur. I shook my head. Because the light hits the floor differently here, makes the scuff marks look like brush strokes. It sounded like poetry, but he said it like fact, and I believed him. It took weeks before I asked the question I had wanted to from the beginning. Why do you come here, Elias? He didn't answer right away, just folded the corner of a newspaper he hadn't really been reading. Then finally, my wife died here, same floor, room 117. I promised her I'd keep showing up. It was so simple, so quiet, but it cracked something open in me. He didn't come for a procedure, didn't come for attention. He came to keep a promise, to sit with her memory, to remind the hospital it still held part of his heart. And suddenly the way he walked, the way he placed his hand on the sill, the way he watched the light, made perfect, painful sense. He wasn't walking to remember. He was walking not to forget. We started to share more. I told him about Ava, about the way the house had gotten too quiet since she left. I told him about my father's final days, about how I sometimes stayed late at the hospital just to avoid going home. He listened, always listened. Grief, he said one afternoon, isn't something to get over. It's something you learn to carry better. He tapped the bench twice. Like this old thing. Doesn't move, doesn't complain, just stays. That bench became sacred, a place not just for patients, but for remembering the parts of ourselves we often leave behind in hallways. One morning I arrived early, too early. The halls were empty, the bench was empty, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't expected. Loneliness, the kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from not being seen. Later that day, Elias arrived, slower than usual, breath shorter, eyes darker. But he smiled. "You kept the bench warm?" I nodded and said, without thinking, "Do you ever wish you could walk faster again?" He paused. "No," he said. "I just wish the world didn't rush so much." Then he looked at me, "And I'm glad you slowed down, too." That day, I wrote another line in my notebook. Sometimes healing looks like sitting beside someone who refuses to move on. What I didn't know then, what I would soon learn, is that even benches wear out, and even the strongest walkers sometimes need to rest, but not before they teach you how to walk beside someone, with presence, not pace, and how to carry what can't be fixed, only honored. It wasn't long before his bench became part of my routine. Between appointments, I'd find myself glancing down the east wing just to see if he was there. Most days he was. Seated in the exact same spot, back straight, legs crossed at the ankle, eyes scanning the floor tiles as if reading something no one else could see. Some days he spoke first, some days he didn't speak at all, but the silence never felt empty. It felt earned. "Do you know why I sit here?" he asked me once, his voice barely above a murmur. I shook my head. "Because the light hits the floor differently here, makes the scuff marks look like brush strokes." It sounded like poetry, but he said it like fact, and I believed him. It took weeks before I asked the question I had wanted to from the beginning. "Why do you come here, Elias?" He didn't answer right away, just folded the corner of a newspaper he hadn't really been reading. Then finally, "My wife died here, same floor, room 117. I promised her I'd keep showing up." It was so simple, so quiet, but it cracked something open in me. He didn't come for a procedure, didn't come for attention. He came to keep a promise, to sit with her memory, to remind the hospital it still held part of his heart. And suddenly the way he walked, the way he placed his hand on the sill, the way he watched the light, made perfect, painful sense. He wasn't walking to remember. He was walking not to forget. We started to share more. I told him about Ava, about the way the house had gotten too quiet since she left. I told him about my father's final days, about how I sometimes stayed late at the hospital just to avoid going home. He listened, always listened. Grief, he said one afternoon, isn't something to get over. It's something you learn to carry better. He tapped the bench twice. Like this old thing. Doesn't move, doesn't complain, just stays. That bench became sacred, a place not just for patience, but for remembering the parts of ourselves we often leave behind in hallways. One morning I arrived early, too early. The halls were empty, the bench was empty, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't expected. Loneliness. The kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from not being seen. Later that day, Elias arrived, slower than usual, breath shorter, eyes darker. But he smiled. "You kept the bench warm?" I nodded and said, without thinking, "Do you ever wish you could walk faster again?" He paused. "No," he said. "I just wish the world didn't rush so much." Then he looked at me, "And I'm glad you slowed down, too." That day, I wrote another line in my notebook. Sometimes healing looks like sitting beside someone who refuses to move on. What I didn't know then, what I would soon learn, is that even benches wear out, and even the strongest walkers sometimes need to rest, but not before they teach you how to walk beside someone, with presence, not pace, and how to carry what can't be fixed, only honored. After the letter, I expected distance. Expected to tuck the memory of Elias into a safe, quiet pocket of my mind, to honor him the way doctors often do, with silence, with restraint, with a thin boundary between personal and professional. But the bench made that impossible. Every time I walked past it, I'd slow, not out of ritual, not yet, but because something in my body remembered how it felt to sit beside him, to share space with a man who had stopped moving but never stopped meaning. That's when the stories began. Not from me, from others. First, it was the physical therapist, Carla. She stopped me one morning near the coffee cart. "Your friend, the one with the sharp eyes and the flannel hats, he asked me once if I thought grief ever grew legs." I blinked. She smiled. I said no. He said, "You're wrong. It walks beside you, every day, until you let it sit down." I hadn't heard that one. Later, one of the janitors, a man named Jorge I'd barely exchanged pleasantries with, paused while mopping the hallway. "Elias used to give me cough drops," he said, unprompted, even when I didn't cough. Said they were for the silences between hard days. He pulled a single lozenge from his pocket, still wrapped. "I didn't eat this one. Been saving it." His presence began to echo, not loudly, not all at once, but in glances, phrases, moments. The bench stayed, not because I fought for it, but because no one dared to remove it. Nurses left it alone during deep cleanse. Interns avoided placing files on it. It became sacred. One day, a young resident, fresh out of school, sat beside me as I reviewed notes. He looked around nervously. "This okay?" I nodded. "It's a bench." But as I said it, I felt it. It wasn't. It was a memory with legs, still walking. That day, the resident told me about his father, gone 2 years, still present in the silence between stethoscope clicks. "I didn't think I could talk about him here," he admitted. "Didn't think we were allowed to carry things." I looked at him. Elias would have disagreed. He smiled and left a paperclip on the bench when he walked away. No reason, just something to mark he'd been there. It stayed for a week. Sometimes I'd find notes folded under the bench, a drawing, a dried flower. Once, a poem that ended mid-sentence. No names, no signatures. But they were stories. Not ones I wrote, ones I held. And somehow, that became enough. That was what Elias had taught me. The body weakens, the voice fades, but the presence you offer, when you sit with someone without trying to fix them, that doesn't disappear. It lingers, in benches, in breath, In the stories that sit beside us long after the person is gone, there are mornings in a hospital that don't feel like mornings at all. They arrive with fluorescent light instead of sunlight, with coffee burnt instead of brewed. But that day, that morning, something was different. I was halfway through reviewing a scan when I heard it. Tap, tap. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even near. But I heard it the way you hear your name whispered in a dream, subtle, wrong-timed, but undeniable. I stood up, walked out of the office, down the east corridor, past room 14B, past the nurses' station, and there it was, the bench, unchanged. But beside it, a man sat hunched, slightly forward, sketching invisible circles on his knee with one finger. He wasn't Elias. He was younger, maybe early 50s, with the drawn look of someone halfway through something he didn't choose. His coat was too thin for the season. His shoes, laced too tightly, betrayed nervousness more than formality. He looked like someone who wanted to vanish politely. I didn't say anything at first, but then I saw it. His hand, tapping the bench, once, then twice, and I felt something ancient stir in me. A rhythm, a memory. He looked up, startled. Maybe he sensed my presence, or maybe it was something else. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to sit here if it's someone's place." "It is," I replied, "but that someone would have wanted you to." His shoulders loosened. A breath escaped. I didn't know where else to go. I sat beside him. Silence settled. Not uncomfortable, not strained, just still. After a while he said, "My father was here, years ago. This was his bench." I looked at him. He didn't look like Elias, but the eyes, something about the eyes. "Elias?" He nodded. "I never really understood him," he said. "He was always somewhere else, even when he was in the room." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a note, yellowed, creased. "He used to leave these around the house," he said. "I found this one in the garage a month ago." He handed it to me. It read, "If you're looking for me, I'm not far. Just follow the silence. It knows where I sit." I exhaled slowly. He was following it. The silence. The man's name was Adam, Elias's son. He had not been close with his father. That much was clear. The way he referred to him in past tense, the way he avoided saying Dad. But he had come back. Not for closure, he said, but because the grief surprised him. Because it wasn't loud. It was persistent, like a faucet that never fully turns off. "I didn't know he meant this much to anyone else," Adam said. "Sometimes I thought he was just quietly disappearing." I looked at him. He wasn't disappearing. He was giving us space to find ourselves inside the silence. Adam didn't respond right away, but then he pulled a small object from his pocket, a cough drop, still wrapped. "I didn't get it back then," he whispered, "but I think I'm starting to." Over the next few weeks, Adam began returning. Not often, just enough. He'd sit on the bench, sometimes read, sometimes write. Once I saw him leave a folded napkin tucked beneath the bench. No words on it, just a drawn circle, colored faintly with pencil. When I asked him what it meant, he shrugged. "Grief," he said, but quieter. Other people noticed him too. Jorge, the janitor, nodded more when he passed. The residents stopped tossing folders on the bench. One nurse left a single white carnation every Friday. No one said anything, but we all knew. The space had changed again. Elias had made room for us, and now his son, without even fully knowing it, was making room again. One morning, as I sipped my coffee too early for comfort, I noticed a ripple in the way the ward breathed. Some places just breathe differently when a certain person is there. And then I saw him, Adam, sitting beside a young girl. She couldn't have been more than 12, clutching a sketchpad, eyes hollow. Her mother was in surgery. I walked by slowly. Adam caught my eye. then looked back at the girl. He wasn't saying much, just sitting. Then I saw him do it. Tap, tap, twice on the bench. Not to interrupt her, not to distract her, just to tell her she wasn't alone. She looked up, met his eyes, and nodded. That was the moment I realized the bench wasn't Elias's legacy. The rhythm was, that quiet cadence that made room for others, that said, "I see you," without saying anything at all. That invited people to sit, not to be fixed, but to be felt. I wrote it in my journal that night. Healing doesn't always sound like a voice. Sometimes it's just 2 taps on wood. A call that says, "You're not invisible here." I used to believe closure came in final words, a hand squeeze, a last breath, a moment when everything you've been carrying suddenly makes sense. But Elias, he didn't believe in endings like that. I found that out the morning I returned to the bench, not because he was there, but because he wasn't. It had been 2 weeks since his last visit, 2 weeks since the envelope, 2 weeks of silence that settled deeper than grief, and yet when I sat down, I didn't feel alone. There was a shadow beside me, not a haunting, a presence. The light hit the window just so, casting the silhouette of the empty space where he once sat. My hand instinctively reached for my coat pocket, the one where I now kept a cough drop, still wrapped. I didn't need it, but I needed it to be there. That's when I heard it, not aloud, but in memory. His voice. "Not everything needs an answer, Doc. Sometimes we just need someone to stay through the question." I leaned back, let the silence swell, and I began to speak, out loud, to no one, to him. "I didn't know you knew my daughter's name." The air was still, but something in me softened. "You were the first person who asked how I was, and waited long enough to hear the real answer." My voice cracked, not from sadness, from release. "I don't know if I helped you, Elias. Not really. I just sat here." And then, almost instinctively, I reached down and tapped the bench. Tap, tap. The sound felt fuller than before, like it echoed, like someone had answered. I closed my eyes, saw him as he once sat, hunched, weary, smiling at the sky like it had whispered back. And then I began to tell him everything I never said. How I was tired, how I missed Ava more in the quiet moments than in the loud ones, how sometimes I didn't feel like a doctor anymore, just a memory keeper in a white coat. I talked until my voice grew hoarse, and still I stayed. At some point, a nurse walked past. She paused, didn't interrupt, just kept walking, slower now, as if honoring the space, as if she knew this wasn't a monologue, but a conversation. The next morning I returned, found something tucked beneath the bench, not a letter, not a cough drop, a small notebook, leather-bound. Inside, 1 page, blank, except for the title, "Things I Didn't Get to Say." No name, no explanation. But under the title, a single line, "Leave it here, add what you need. No one's alone in silence." That afternoon I wrote, "I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I'm still not. But I'm learning how to keep someone without holding them back." Weeks passed, the notebook filled, not quickly, not daily, but steadily. Staff, patients, visitors, they'd write something, fold the page, place it back. Some signed their names. Most didn't. One day, I found a child's drawing, a man on a bench. Beside him, a smaller figure holding a balloon. Underneath, in messy pencil, "I think he listens." I kept going back, not because I missed Elias, though I did, but because I needed the space he left. It wasn't empty. It was open, a place to keep unfinished conversations, a bench where silence didn't mean absence, where grief could sit without having to explain itself. That was what Elias gave me. Not closure, but the courage to keep talking, even when no one answers. Because maybe, just maybe, the act of saying it is how we finish what we never thought we'd get to say. It happened on a Thursday, a soft morning, the kind that held more light than sound. I had no plans to visit the bench that day. I had rounds, a case conference, and a follow-up on a patient who'd survived what the chart had labeled unsurvivable. But somehow by 10 o'clock, I found myself walking down the familiar hallway toward the south garden, toward the bench, and he was there. Elias. Not in memory, not in shadow, in person. Barely. He sat hunched over, thinner than I remembered, his coat pooling around him like a forgotten blanket. His hands trembled in his lap, but they were empty. No cough drop, no paper, just skin and bone and something quieter than breath. I froze. He looked up. His eyes had changed, not empty, never empty but deeper, as though time had folded inside them. "Doc," he rasped, "didn't think I'd make it back." I walked over slowly, sat beside him, said nothing. He took a shaky breath. Took me 20 minutes to get from the elevator to here. The distance was maybe 20 yards. I nodded. He chuckled, though it hurt. Was worth it. Then silence, but not the usual kind. This silence had weight. It sat between us like a third presence, a witness. "I'm scared," he said. It was the first time he ever said it aloud. I turned to him, met his eyes. "So am I," I whispered. We sat like that for what felt like hours. I don't know if I was comforting him or clinging to him. Probably both. He didn't cry. He didn't wince. He just stared at the sky and said, "Do you remember the story I told you? The one about the old fisherman who walked to the same dock every day, even when he knew the fish were gone?" I nodded. I used to think he was foolish. Now I think he just wanted to be somewhere his hands remembered. He held up his hand then. It shook violently, but he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a pebble, worn smooth, blue-gray, no bigger than a button. "This was in my wife's garden," he said. "I used to rub it when she got quiet, when her mind started going." He handed it to me. It was warm. "I think I want you to keep it." I wanted to argue, to refuse, but I knew this wasn't a gesture. It was a legacy. An hour later, he tried to stand. "I want to walk back," he said. I reached out to help. "No," he said. "Not yet. Just let me try." He braced both hands on the bench, his knees locked, his breath hitched. He rose, trembled, paused, then took one step, and crumpled. I caught him halfway down. He didn't fall. He leaned, and in that moment, I held all of him. Not just the weight of his body, but his strength, his fear, his choice. He rested his head on my shoulder. "I wanted to make it back on my own," he whispered, "but maybe it's okay if I don't." I didn't say anything. I just held him, and I cried. Not because he couldn't do it, but because he tried. Because he still believed that walking, even one step, was worth the effort. That trying was a kind of remembering, too. When I wheeled him back inside, he was too tired to speak, but as we passed the bench, he reached out with one hand and tapped the wood. Tap, tap. The sound didn't echo. It landed, firm, final, a signature. That evening, I found the pebble still in my pocket. I placed it on the bench, right where his hand had rested. It's still there, no plaque, no inscription, just a small, ordinary thing left by an extraordinary man. A step he couldn't finish, but still chose to begin. It's strange, the things we hold on to. Not diplomas, not framed awards, not the thick-bound medical journals that once lined my shelves in rows of academic pride, but pebbles, worn, silent, inconsequential to most, unless you knew the weight they carried. Elias didn't come back after that Thursday, not the next day, not the next week. The pebble stayed. I left it where his hand had tapped the bench, right at the corner where sunlight filtered through at just the right angle in the mornings. I didn't guard it, didn't label it, but somehow no one ever touched it. Even the grounds crew left that corner undisturbed, as though something in the air told them this wasn't debris, this was something sacred. I stopped bringing my coat, stopped bringing the extra cough drops, but I still came. Same time, same bench. I don't know what I expected. A sign? A letter tucked beneath the bench slats? Another notebook? But nothing came, only quiet, and yet the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt inhabited, like a conversation I was still part of, even without words. One morning, a child wandered over with his grandfather. The boy couldn't have been more than 4. He touched the pebble, turned it over once, looked up at me and asked, "Is this yours?" I smiled. "No," I said. "It belongs to someone who remembered things better when he had it." The boy nodded like he understood. He placed it back, just a little closer to the center, then ran off. That was when I realized something. The pebble wasn't mine to protect. It was a marker, a reminder, that there are people we meet who don't hand us answers, but give us a place to leave the questions. People who don't need to finish their story for us to carry it forward. People who, in a single gesture, a single step, a single tap, change how we listen for the rest of our lives. That evening, I stayed long after sunset. I pulled out my notebook, the same one I hadn't touched since Arthur, and I wrote one sentence. He walked slower every day until I finally saw what strength really meant. Then I folded the page, placed it under the pebble, and let it go. I don't know who will read it, maybe no one, but maybe someone will sit here one day with their own silence, their own grief, their own unfinished sentence, and realize they're not the first, that someone else sat here too, that the bench remembers, that strength isn't always in the standing, or the walking, or even the speaking. Sometimes it's in staying, sometimes it's in witnessing, sometimes it's in letting someone else finish what we started. To the listener who stayed through this story, thank you. Thank you for walking these quiet steps with us, for sitting on the bench, for holding space for people like Elias and Arthur and every patient who doesn't need saving, just seeing. If this story moved something in you, even slightly, maybe take a moment today to leave something behind, a word, a memory, a pause. Even if no one else notices, the right person might, and they'll remember that someone once left a pebble just so they wouldn't feel alone. If it touched you, consider sharing it with someone who walks slower now, or someone who listens deeply. Let the story find them. Let them find the bench.